Hey guys, how's it going? As per usual, I've got some of the scariest Reddit stories I could find. And while I'm reading today's stories, I'm going to be adding some small details to my underground village. So yeah, let's go ahead and get right into it. The first story today is from r/no sleep from user Midnight Arcana. We were given one rule before entering the abandoned subway line. Do not whistle. I've spent 6 years working as a maintenance tech for the city's subway system. When I first started, I thought the job was simple. Swap out burnout light bulbs, check the wiring, patch up the occasional water leak. But working down there in that thick, absolute darkness teaches you something real quick. The underground doesn't play by the rules of the surface world. It belongs to a much older, much more brutal reality. My name is Tyler. I didn't take this job out of some romantic love for the underground. I just needed the money. And the pay was good. While normal people walked under the sun during the day, I'd lose all track of time in the tunnels. Down there's no daylight, no clocks, there's only sound, and sometimes the terrifying absence of it. My partner was Miller. He was about 10 years older than me, his hair prematurely graying, his skin permanently stained a dusty subway gray. He knew those subterranean labyrinths like the back of his hand. The strangest thing about Miller was that he never asked questions. It was like he knew that not asking was a hell of a lot safer than hearing the answer. I used to think he was just a coward. Later, I realized it was pure survival instinct. The day they assigned us to the Black Line, the usual locker room chatter instantly died. That name wasn't a joke among the transit workers. It was always spoken in hushed, careful whispers. It was a tunnel system built in the 1920s, shut down after an unexplained cave-in. Wiped from official maps and stamped as non-existent. Officially, there was nothing down there. Practically, well, rumors said lights flickered in the dark and strange noises echoed out. Sometimes the guy sent down there just never came back. Our foreman called us into his office, tossed a yellowed, faded blueprint onto his desk, looked us dead in the eye, and said just one thing. There's only one rule down there. Absolute silence. No talking, no joking around, and for God's sake, whatever you do, do not whistle. I smirked. Miller just nodded. Like everyone else, I figured it was just some old workplace superstition. Acoustics, gas leak risks, pressure differentials. My brain immediately scrambled for a logical explanation. Human beings love inventing logic because it's easier than believing in an unknown, looming horror. But the Black Line doesn't care about logic. Me, Miller, and two other techs, Jackson and Lee, were riding a rusty, ancient utility elevator down into the dark. The lift rattled and groaned, shaking as if something beneath the earth was dragging us down into its maw. The air was heavy with the smell of ozone and wet, rotting iron. Jackson looked down at his phone screen and snickered. Man, if they have Wi-Fi down here, I might just move in, save a fortune on rent. Lee gave a nervous laugh. Stay down here for 10 minutes and you won't even remember what the word Wi-Fi means. Miller didn't laugh. He just leaned against the metal wall, chewing on an unlit cigarette, his eyes glued to the elevator doors. I looked over at him. You're always this quiet? He shrugged. Silence is a part of the job down here. Jackson grinned and leaned forward, his voice echoing off the metal enclosure. So, what you're saying is, if someone calls my name down here, I shouldn't answer. Come on. That's just rude to the subway goblins. Miller's gaze turned ice cold. Pray that nothing calls you. The entrance to the Black Line was a heavy, riveted iron door. The faded red paint scrawled across it looked like dried blood. Restricted access, structural instability. Jackson slapped the iron door. Classic. Every cheap horror movie starts exactly like this. Lee swallowed hard. Yeah, right before the monster jumps out. We unlocked the heavy deadbolts. The door groaned in protest as we shoved it open. Inside, there was no sound, no dripping water, no airflow, just a total, crushing void. It felt as though sound itself had been strangled and left to die in that tunnel. Jackson stared into the blackness, pursed his lips, and suddenly let out a sharp, piercing whistle. The sound sliced through the tunnel like an arrow, stretching out into the dark before slowly dying away. I swear, this place is just an empty parking lot, Jackson laughed. In a flash, Miller pinned Jackson by his collar, slamming him hard against the brick wall. Do not whistle. What the hell is wrong with you, man? Jackson shoved him off. Who's gonna hear us down here? The rats? Miller didn't answer. There was deep, paralyzing terror in his eyes, far worse than anger. He slowly turned around and began walking into the dark. The first few hours went by with standard maintenance work. The beams of our flashlights barely cut through the gloom, illuminating thick clouds of dancing dust. Everything seemed normal. Suddenly, Jackson dropped his wrench. He stood up straight, freezing in place. Hey guys, I think someone's calling me. Lee let out a tense laugh. Who's calling you? The collection agency? Jackson shook his head, his face completely pale. I'm serious. There's a voice coming from further down. It's saying my name. From behind us, Miller's voice cut through the dark, cold, and ruthless. Keep working, do not look up, ignore it. By the time our break rolled around, we were all exhausted. We sat down in a small concrete electrical cutout. Even as we pulled out our lunches, everyone tried to keep as quiet as possible. Even Jackson had gone silent. But then Jackson pulled a pair of orange foam earplugs from his pocket and tried to stuff them into his ears. Suddenly, Miller lunged forward and snatched them right out of his hands. What's your problem? Jackson snapped, jumping to his feet, his voice echoing loudly in the cramped space. Don't put those in. You don't own my ears, man. My head is pounding. I just want some damn quiet. Miller stepped into Jackson's space, standing inches from his face. He spoke so quietly, his words felt like dripping poison. It's dangerous to be deaf down here. Sound comes into this place, but it doesn't leave. Do you understand? If they realize you can't hear them, they'll come closer. A suffocating silence fell over the room, and then, from right inside the concrete wall we were leaning against, came a faint sound. Tap. Jackson whipped his head around. Did you guys hear that? Tap, tap. This time it was closer, clearer, like someone was striking the concrete with something hard and solid, like a bone. Then something else happened. A voice drifted in from the distance, and it sounded human. But the words were garbled, mangled. It sounded like someone trying to speak while choking, their mouth packed with dirt. The voice grew clearer. We're here. Every hair on my arm stood on end. Lee took a step back, his flashlight trembling violently in his hand. No way, is this real? It's just an echo of our own voices, right? Jackson, tell me it's a radio interference. Jackson stepped toward the wall, looking completely hypnotized. Who's out there? He yelled. Stop! Miller lunged to grab him, but he was too late. Jackson pressed his ear right against the freezing concrete. 1 second, 2 seconds. The expression on his face shattered. His smirk vanished, his eyes dilated with sheer horror. They say they know us, he whispered. What are they saying? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. Jackson stared blankly into the void. It's my mom's voice. She's calling my name. She's telling me it's so cold inside. Miller grabbed him by the jacket and violently threw him to the floor. What the hell are you doing? Jackson shrieked. Miller leaned over him, hissing through gritted teeth. They don't want you. They want your answer. You just gave yourself to them. Behind the wall, the noise erupted. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was several, maybe dozens of people whispering, letting out wet, raspy laughs, scratching their fingernails against the concrete. The tunnel was drowning in the sound. We were completely surrounded. Then, instantly, it all stopped, like a knife cutting a thread. A dead, suffocating silence fell over us. Our flashlights began to blink and sputter. And from the exact center of that darkness, from the deepest point of the tunnel, a sound came back to us. It was a sharp, short whistle. The exact same whistle Jackson had let out hours ago. But this time, someone or something was whistling it back at us. Incredibly slow, incredibly deliberate. Jackson's jaw trembled. Tears began streaming down his face. This is a messed up prank, he whispered, though he didn't believe his own words anymore. Leo bolted toward the exit. I'm getting the hell out of here. Open the door. Miller grabbed him by the arm, locking him in place. His hand went down to the heavy iron pipe wrench on his tool belt. Staring straight into the blackness, he said something I'll never forget. Do not run, not yet. If we move now, they will play with us. But Jackson wasn't listening to us anymore. He slowly got to his feet. His eyes were wide, but looked entirely blank, like a blind man's. He looked right past us, staring intently into the pitch-black void behind us. My mom is crying. She's all alone. I can't leave her down there, he muttered. He took a step forward, straight into the dark. Jackson, stop! I lunged for him, but Miller threw his arm across my chest, holding me back with terrifying strength. It's too late, Tyler, he answered. Jackson stepped into the shadows. The beam of his flashlight danced frantically against the brick walls for a few seconds, and then it abruptly died. Just moments later, a wet, sickening sound echoed from the dark. It sounded like someone ripping a massive piece of raw meat away from the bone with a dull butcher knife. There was no other sound. Jackson didn't even scream, just a wet gasp and the horrific crunch of snapping bones. Lee dropped to his knees, clapping his hands over his mouth. But the sheer terror inside him broke through, and he let out a piercing shriek. Jackson! Huge mistake. Before Lee's scream could even finish echoing off the walls, dozens of different voices blasted back from the darkness. They were all mimicking Lee's exact voice, but distorted, warped into a demonic, mocking pitch. Jackson! 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 A thick black liquid began dripping from the tunnel ceiling onto our heads. Our flashlights died completely. We were plunged into total, absolute darkness. The only thing left was the pathetic, dim beam of the small backup light in my pocket. When I switched it on and aimed it at the floor where Lee had just been kneeling, he was gone. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, just his flashlight, dropped on the tracks, still rolling in a slow circle. I froze. I couldn't even draw breath into my lungs. Miller's hand, hard as an iron, clamped down on my arm. We run. No matter what you hear, do not look back. Do not breathe too loud. Run. We bolted back toward the lift. We didn't hear the sound of footsteps chasing us. No, what we heard was much worse. It was the sounds of bones scraping against concrete. The sound of something slithering along the walls and across the ceiling, keeping pace right above us. When we hit the heavy iron door at the entrance, Miller threw me through the opening, but he stayed on the other side, pulling the massive iron door shut from the inside. Miller, get in here, I screamed. He looked at me through the narrowing gap. For the first time, there was no fear on his face, just a bizarre, disturbing peace. I've been a part of this place for a very long time, Tyler, he said, and then he smiled. But it wasn't Miller's smile. It was a wide, jagged, completely unnatural grin that stretched too far across his face. And behind him, out of the darkness, dozens of pale, hollow faces materialized. Every single one of them was wearing Miller's smile. He slammed the door shut. The heavy iron latch dropped into place with a deafening clang. I sprinted to the elevator alone, slamming my fist against the button like a madman. As the elevator doors began to slide shut, I heard the heavy iron door below violently splintering apart, all the way up the dark shaft. A chorus of whistles followed me. The sounds gradually shifted, morphing into my own voice, calling my name up the shaft. Tyler, Tyler, come back down. The official incident report stated that Jackson and Lee were caught in an accidental tunnel collapse. The search and rescue team spent weeks down there, but they never recovered the bodies. As for Miller, when HR went to pull the archives, they found out that no one with the last name Miller had ever been employed by the transit authority. The supervisor, his face completely bloodless, stared at me and tossed the paperwork across the desk. Tyler, what the hell are you talking about? Only you, Jackson, and Lee went down to that line. There was no fourth man. I quit the job that very day. I didn't even go back to collect my final paycheck. Now I live far away from the city, in a small town on the surface where the sun is always shining. I chose an apartment on the 3rd floor, just so I can have solid concrete beneath my feet instead of dirt. I live with a diagnosis of severe PTSD. Antidepressants and sleeping pills are my only real friends now. I leave every single light on at night. I'm so terrified of the quiet that I'll either keep the TV or the radio running 24/7. Because whenever the world goes truly silent, my mind drifts back to that absolute void beneath the concrete. Taking the subway or even walking through an underground pedestrian tunnel is completely out of the question for me. If I even catch a faint whiff of damp concrete or rusty iron on the street, my throat tightens up and my heart hammers against my chest like it's trying to break free. I don't see ghosts. Nothing supernatural happens to me out here. But the second I close my eyes, I see Jackson smiling as he walks into the dark. I hear Lee's scream dissolving into nothingness. And worst of all, I see the missing man, Miller, wearing that strange, impossibly wide grin. Wow, that was very well written. A huge shout out to Midnight Arcana. That was really good. Also, very nightmare inducing. I'm gonna be sleeping with the lights on tonight. Anyways, let's go ahead and get on with the next story. It's also from r/no-sleep from user AW Edmondson 0. My boyfriend brought me to his parents' house for the first time. My boyfriend, at the time, and I were on a trip to Wisconsin to see the house on the rock. It so happened that his parents' house was on the way, so we agreed to stay the night with them. Then his parents agreed that we'd stay till Saturday night, and then that we'd stay till Sunday church service. And pretty soon, our whole weekend was now centered around hanging around my boyfriend's hometown, which he'd never spoken of fondly. His parents were nice enough when I met them, but they had old ideas about how unmarried couples shouldn't be sleeping together. So I wound up alone in the 2nd floor guest room that smelled like mothballs and had a mint condition Nordic track parked in the corner. The single bedroom window, which would have overlooked the backyard, didn't have curtains. Instead, the glass was covered, or encrusted, in layers of tape and yellowed newspapers. At least I can say the mattress was comfortable. I've always had a difficult time falling asleep in a bed that wasn't mine. I was in that odd drifting point between wakefulness and sleep when I first heard tapping on the window. Some tree branch must have been poking against the glass. Not a big deal, it happens, especially during windy nights. If the tapping had continued at a steady pace, I might have been able to tune it out, as if it were a metronome. I could have even used it for self-hypnosis. But the winds outside weren't so kind. I'd get used to that staccato beat of tap, 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 then the winds would stop, and there'd be a lull. The silence would ease me back to a half-asleep state. Then the taps returned. It must have happened 8 or 9 times. I couldn't get any sleep. The bedroom didn't have a box fan, but the closet outside did. I grabbed the fan, plugged it into the wall, and cranked it to the highest setting. Finally, the taps were drowned out by white noise. The fan also circulated the air in a room I don't think anyone had been inside for months. I breathed deep, appreciating anything that minimized the inherent stuffiness of a guest room in an antique house. I found myself on the cusp of REM sleep when the power to the whole house shorted out. It started with a loud crack like thunder. Then the fan stopped spinning, the overhead lights wouldn't switch on, and the taps came back. The winds were extra strong now. The rush of what must have been a huge storm above us sounded almost like laughter. But that was just a trick of my pattern-seeking mind. My boyfriend was a deep sleeper, but an early riser. Apparently, he takes after his parents that way. When I stumbled downstairs at dawn, his folks were busy on their flip phones, calling to figure out why the electricity wasn't working. The answer was obvious when I looked out the front door. Their house was next to a power line, which overnight had broken and fallen to the ground. I was rubbing grit from my eyes. Maybe I had gotten a little sleep? Strong winds, I mumbled. What wind? My boyfriend asked. He was busy in the kitchen, spreading jam on an untoasted bread slice. You didn't hear the wind last night? I shook my head. I knew he was a heavy sleeper, but to not even hear the raging storm that was here last night that was strong enough to down a power line? I swear, he said. It was a perfectly calm night, outside my window at least. I groaned. These people were expecting me to deal with 2 more nights of this. 2 more nights of that incessant tapping. Nuh-uh, nope. My eyes burned as I marched my way into the garage. I grabbed a ladder and hedge clippers and pushed open the side door. The ground my bare feet touched was dry. No rain last night. Babe, what are you doing? My boyfriend asked. I took in that he had already dressed, while I was still in my pajamas. I wasn't dressed for the work I needed to do. I pressed forward regardless. The ladder scraped on concrete behind me. My boyfriend followed. Again, he asked what I was doing. I cannot sleep in this house till I've cut down the branch that kept slamming against my window all night. I gritted my teeth. I can't change the winds, but I can do that at least. My boyfriend squinted. A branch? I turned around the corner into the backyard. The hedge clippers dropped from my hand. For a long time, I couldn't speak. After pitching a royal fit, my boyfriend agreed to keep driving north and not stay the whole weekend with his folks. His mom asked why we were skipping out so early. I didn't say anything. My boyfriend made up some excuse about how we needed a place with working electricity. We wound up spending Saturday night in a Motel 6, but I wasn't complaining. We crossed into Wisconsin after that and finally saw the house on the rock. We drove home without an incident. We're still together, but his mom doesn't like me. Thinks I'm some kind of prima donna, too good for her middle-class home, but that's not it at all. My reason for wanting to leave had nothing to do with the house, or her, or my boyfriend's dad. I didn't admit the truth because it's better my future in-laws think I'm stuck up than a total nutcase. Because here's what I found in the backyard of their house. Nothing. There was no tree tall enough to have branches that reached the second floor. There were no trees, period. None. Not even a shrub. Even now, my fiancé insists there hadn't been any storms that night at his parents' place. But if there wasn't any wind, what had knocked down the power line? You ever been scratched by a cat? I have. Used to own one of those feisty tuxedo cats as a kid. So let me tell you, when I looked over the down power line at the spot where the wood had cracked, the gouges embedded in that wood looked exactly like claw marks. Maybe the connection seems tenuous to you, but I'm certain whatever had been tapping on my second floor window, whatever had destroyed the power line, and whatever had made those laughs that so easily mimic the wind are all the same entity. Or, barring that, they're related. And that's why I insisted on leaving my fiancé's parents' house, even though it made me seem rude. Because come Saturday night, I did not want to be in that same spot, in case it came back. Okay, so going back to earlier in that story, which was great by the way, instead of just getting a curtain, why put newspaper over the window? Like, come on. The room's definitely got to be haunted. Here's the top comment on that one. I think since your boyfriend's family covered the window in the guest room, then they most probably know something about the thing you heard that night, which makes the fact that they let you sleep in that room without any sort of warning all the more suspicious. Maybe you can find an opportunity to ask your boyfriend about why they bothered to cover up that window. I don't think he'll tell you the truth, but maybe you'll get a clue from him. Yeah, I'm thinking the in-laws probably didn't like the OP from the beginning. Anyways, let me know what you guys thought about that one. And yeah, let's go ahead and get on with the next story. It's from r/nosleep from user glasscat6197. A link to their YouTube channel will be in the description, so if you like science-y stuff, go check it out. It only knows 2 words. We were 4 days into a week-long camping trip in the Chuska Mountains when Danny first heard it. I want to be clear about something before I get into this. Danny is not the kind of person who spooks easily. He grew up in rural New Mexico. He's been hunting since he was 9. He's the guy who stays calm when everyone else is panicking. The guy you want next to you when things go wrong. When Danny says something scared him, you listen. We could all use a Danny in our life, guys. We were sitting around the fire, me, Danny, his girlfriend Priya, and our friend Marcus, when Danny went quiet in the middle of a sentence. Just stopped talking and stared out past the tree line. What? Marcus said. Did you hear that? We listened. Wind in the pines, the fire crackling. Nothing else. Hear what? Priya said. Danny shook his head slowly. Probably nothing. But he didn't look like it was nothing. He looked like a man doing math in his head and not liking the answer. We're all in our late 20s. The trip was Marcus's idea. He'd been going through a rough divorce and needed to get out of the city. And we'd all agreed that a week off the grid was exactly what everyone needed. No cell service, no internet, nothing but mountains and trees and the kind of silence that cleans you out. The Chuskas sit on the Navajo Nation. Danny has Diné ancestry on his mother's side, which is part of why he suggested the specific location. He knows the land. He respects it in a way that the rest of us, raised on concrete and convenience, don't entirely understand, but try to follow his lead on. He had one rule when we arrived. Don't be loud after dark. Don't draw attention. We thought he meant bears. The second night was when I heard it. We'd gone to bed around 10. I was in the tent I was sharing with Marcus, almost asleep, when it drifted in from somewhere out in the dark. A voice. Human. Distant. Help me. I sat up. Help me. I unzipped the tent before I'd fully thought it through. Danny was already outside, standing perfectly still, facing the trees. He'd clearly been awake. Someone's out there, I said. We have to... No. His voice was flat and final. Danny, someone is... Keep your voice down. He turned to look at me, and his expression stopped me cold. I've known Danny for 11 years, and I've never seen him look like that. Get back in the tent, don't make any noise, don't use your flashlight. There's someone out there asking for help. No, he said very quietly. There isn't. I stood there for a moment listening. The voice came again, from a slightly different direction than before. Help me. Something was wrong with it. I couldn't name it at first. It was clearly a human voice. The right pitch, the right cadence, 2 recognizable English words, but there was something underneath it that made my spine go cold. Something about the way it landed, like a recording of the words rather than someone actually saying them. Like something that had heard the words and was producing the sounds without understanding what they meant. Skinwalker alert, Wendigo, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, anyways. Sorry, I got back in the tent. I didn't sleep. In the morning, Danny explained. Not everything. I don't think he was willing to say everything, but enough. He told us about the Yi Naldalushi. I apologize for my pronunciation. What outsiders call skinwalkers. He told us they were real, that his grandmother had told him about them since he was small, that there were things in these mountains that were not what they appeared to be. Marcus laughed. Not meanly, more nervously. You're telling me a skinwalker was outside our camp last night? I'm telling you something was, Danny said. And I'm telling you that if you had gone out there, it would have been very bad. How do you know it wasn't just someone who needed help? Danny looked at him for a long moment. Because of what it was saying. He let that sit. Then he said, these things, they learn sounds. They mimic what they hear. They're not like animals that learn calls. They specifically learn human sounds. He paused. Think about what sounds a human makes when one of these things find them. The fire popped. Help me, Priya said quietly. She'd gone pale. Danny nodded. That's what it knows. That's what it heard. Over and over for a long time. He looked out at the trees. That's the only reason it says it. Nobody spoke for a while. Marcus, to his credit, did not laugh again. We should have left that morning. I want to be honest about that. We had enough information to make the right call, and we didn't make it. And what happened next is partly on us for that reason. Danny wanted to go. Priya wanted to go. Marcus and I convinced them to stay. One more day, we said. We'd be careful. We'd be quiet. We wouldn't go out after dark. I think we both still hadn't fully accepted what Danny was telling us. Not really. It's one thing to hear something wrong in the dark and feel afraid. It's another thing, in the daylight, with the fire going and coffee in your hand, to fully believe that something inhuman spent the night circling your camp. Yeah, this is natural selection at this point, guys. We stayed. The third night, it got closer. I know this because I could hear it moving. Not in an animal way. Animals have a logic to how they move through the underbrush, a pattern that makes sense. This was different. It would be still for a long time, and then it would be somewhere else, with no sound of transition, as though it had decided to be in a different place and simply was. Help me. Closer now, maybe 40 feet from the tent. Help me. 30. I was lying completely still with my eyes open in the dark, listening to Marcus breathe beside me, when I became aware of something that made every hair on my body stand up at once. The voice was coming from two directions. Not alternating, simultaneously. Two voices, identical, both saying the same words, slightly out of sync with each other. Help me, help me. I grabbed Marcus's arm. He was already awake. Neither of us moved. It stayed outside the tent for what felt like an hour. Probably wasn't. Probably 15 minutes at most. But time moves differently when you're lying still in the dark, trying not to breathe too loud, listening to something that learned its only words from dying people circle your tent in the dark. Then it was gone. Not gradually, just gone. We left before dawn. Danny had us packed and moving while it was still dark, which felt wrong. I wanted light. I wanted to be able to see, but he said movement was safer than staying. He let us out with one small flashlight, keeping the beam low, and none of us spoke the entire 2-mile walk to the trailhead. We were almost to the cars when Priya grabbed Danny's arm. At the edge of the tree line, maybe 60 feet away, something was standing in the pre-dawn gray. It was tall, too tall. The proportions were almost human, but not quite. The limbs a little too long, the head sitting at a slight angle on the neck, like something that had learned the shape of a person from a description rather than observation. It was still watching us. Danny kept walking, slow, steady. He didn't look at it directly. He said quietly without turning his head, "Don't look at it. Don't stop walking. Get in the cars." I looked anyway. I wish I hadn't. Because in the moment before I forced my eyes away, it moved. Not toward us, just shifted its weight, a small adjustment, and I heard it, very softly from across that 60 feet of gray morning air. Help me. And the thing that will stay with me, the thing I can't stop thinking about even now, weeks later, safe in my apartment with the lights on, is that it sounded hopeful. Like something that had been saying those words for a very long time to many people in many situations, and had learned that the words worked. Had learned that those words made people come closer. We've talked about it since, the four of us. Danny more than anyone. He told me something a few days after we got back, when we were alone, that he hadn't said in front of the others. He said his grandmother told him that the reason they learned those words, specifically those words, is because of frequency. They learn what they hear most often, and what they hear most often from humans in specific situations where they encounter humans is a person at the end of their options. A person realizing, in the last moments before the end, that they need someone to come. Help me. He said his grandmother told him the worst part isn't that they say it. The worst part is that at some point in the very beginning, a very long time ago, one of them heard it for the first time, and came closer to see what it meant, and learned. I don't go camping anymore, and sometimes, late at night, when I'm most of the way asleep and the apartment is quiet, I think about that thing standing at the tree line in the gray morning light. I think about how still it was. I think about how long it must have been doing this, how many camps it had circled, how many people had heard those two words drift out of the dark and made the mistake of going toward them. I think about how it sounded hopeful, and I turn on the lights, and I wait for the morning. Hell no. Hell no. Absolutely not. I'm good. Never camping again. I don't know. Actually, are any of you guys like avid campers? Because like if you listen to this story while you're camping, like, all right, if you're camping right now and you're listening to this, please let me know in the comments, because you're insane. Guys, I know I just mixed like 3 sentences, but the ADHD in me is scared. Anyways, that's all the scary Reddit stories and Minecraft I have for you today. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe, as it does help me out greatly. And also, you know I'd never forget about you. Shout out to my channel members. Thank you so much for your support on the channel. If you guys do want to further support the channel, that link is in the description. However, it is not at all required, completely optional. And with all that said, I will see you tomorrow. Peace.